thanks, John, and welcome to everybody. Thanks so much for being here. It's good to see you all, or most of you anyway. Thanks for joining us and making us a part of your day. The Early Assurance Program is one that we are extremely proud of and feel terrific about. I was there at its inception many years ago, and the dean at the time and I were talking about sort of how to reach out in a more meaningful way to our own undergraduates. I'm sure you have heard and know that in the intervening years, the strength of our own undergraduates has increased geometrically, and you guys are just terrific. Whoever it was back then was terrific too, but you're even more terrific than they are. So this program was designed as a way for us to connect the two places, the undergrad and the law school. And it's been incredibly successful, and we are delighted to have it, and am happy to see you all right now, and the interest has increased each year, and we are delighted about that. A bit of a history here. We conceived the program so that you could all apply in the spring of your junior year. And we would then look at these files and be extraordinarily selective in who we took. And one of the benefits of doing that for you all was that you did not have to take the LSAT. You did not have to take it back then. And we were just going on sort of just your transcripts, et cetera, and then everything else about you. It is where the undergraduate world seems to be moving with test optionals, et cetera, et cetera. But law schools, that was an unheard of thing. We got permission to do so, and away we went, and it worked fabulously well. There did seem to be, then there was a time several years ago, maybe more than several, where there was pushback because a lot of other schools, not Georgetown, but a lot of other schools were doing this in an attempt to increase their enrollment without having to worry about test scores to factor into median scores, et cetera, et cetera. That then the ABA got involved, and there was a whole thing. And we were on the verge of not being able to do this. You know, we could take you as juniors, we're gonna make you all take the test, et cetera, before we considered you as an applicant. I can remember having some real sort of important discussions and thoughts about this. And I just made up my mind to say, we are doing this. The program has been too successful. We are too close as institutions, well, part of the same institution, but as two parts of the same institution. I wasn't about to give this up. So we landed at the following compromise, which allowed us to continue this program, but at some commitment on our part. What the ABA insisted that we do is that we have a test score from you all. We have to do that. But they didn't say I needed to have that test score when I considered you as an applicant. You just needed to take it before you enrolled. So that seemed to me, that was the opening. Us lawyers know openings when we see it. And that was the opening we were looking for. So our situation is that I will be considering your files without a test score. If you've taken one by then, fine, but without a test score, none is required. But before you enroll, you must take a test. You must take it. Now, there is an option, is that right, John, where Angela, if there's you're in the top certain percentage, we'll look at your SAT scores. Is that correct? Remind me.
So we ask for the SAT and ACT scores on the Dean certification form. And if you're admitted and your score was in the 85th percentile or better, we can use that score in lieu of the Lsat, GRE, or GMAT. That's what I thought.
That's what I thought. So again, knowing my friend Charlie Deacon as well as I do, you were all spectacular or you wouldn't have been admitted. So that usually takes care of this. If you weren't for whatever reason, then you need to take one of the tests. But that's sort of the background of this. This is where we are now, and we're in a great place, and there are lots of applicants. I'm guessing you all have heard that applications to law schools this year are very, very high. We've seen a surge here at Georgetown Law School. Applications are way up. I expect this is going to be the state of being for a while. The interest, if the country's interest in law and commitment to justice, et cetera, has probably never been higher in my lifetime. So we have got a whole bunch of applicants, and I think we will continue to do so. While that will play out with early assurance, I don't know, but I would encourage you all to, if you are all interested and want to come to Georgetown Law School, I encourage you to follow through and do this. It's just going to get harder to get in as time goes along. So good for you to be this interested. And I look forward to reading your files. In terms of numbers, and I'm going to be talking about the essay in a second. In terms of numbers, last year we received roughly 100 applications, I think something like that, to early assurance. And I probably admitted somewhere between 20 and 25, somewhere in there, I think, generally is pretty close to what we've done. The quality of you all is off the charts, and it's fun, agonizing, and difficult as I read all of these files. But it is a sort of very manageable applicant pool. It's fun to look at all 100 at the same time, because in the other world, the regular admissions world, John and I are looking at 13,000 all at the same time, which is considerably more than 100. So it is a difficult process. Test scores are useful to us, but we're doing just fine without them. Thank you. And so we look forward to reading your files. Let me get to, from my point of view, the best strategy you all can do as you get ready to apply. And then I'm going to turn over to John, and then I've got 15 other Zooms in the next 3 hours, I think. So, and I'm also hungry, so I could use some lunch. Let me just talk a little bit about how you present yourself to us. The purpose of every application, but particularly early assurance, is that it's my job to get to know you. And it's your job to give me information, enough open, genuine information about you so that I can get to know you. We each have jobs in this. Your job comes first. Your job is to sort of present yourself to us in the best possible light, of course, but also in the most open possible light. We're trying to get to know you. So talk to us about what your hopes and dreams are. Talk to us about why you want to do this. Talk to us about why you want to do it at Georgetown. Whatever you want to talk about, it's all good. But I just want to get to know you. So let me give you what I give everybody, all the other more traditional applicants, 5 touch points, goalposts for you to touch as you write your essay. Just want to talk about that right now. 5 touch points as you write your essay. Keeping in mind, the overhanging purpose of this is for me to get to know you. You got to help me with that. You got to help me with that. We'll have your resume. We'll hear from your teachers. We want to hear from you, about you. That's your job. That's your job. 5 touch points. First, be focused, concise. I think 2 pages probably does it on your essay. 2 pages. Don't ramble on and hope that I latch onto and focus on the things you want me to. That's not my job. Edit. That's your job. Let's all agree it's much harder to write shorter than it is to write longer because of the editing part. John and I aren't going to do that. You do that. Focus. 2 pages would probably do it. You can write more if you want. It's not hard and fast, but that's much more effective for you all. Next, make sure your first sentence or paragraph is killer. Draw us in. Make sure that's, what you want. The ideal reaction is for me to say, that's interesting. Tell me more. That's what you want to do. Try and do that right at the beginning, if you can. Number 3, the purpose of this is for me to learn about you. So at the end of the day, write about yourself. Whatever topic you're choosing, make sure we are learning about you, not about your grandfather, not about a trip you went on, not even about an activity. All those topics are fine. But at the end, it's got to be about you. That's number 3. Number 4, tell a story. Let there be a beginning, a middle, and end. Be creative as heck. Do whatever you want. It's all good. But tell a story, a beginning, a middle, an end. Don't be all over the place. Tell the story. And number 5, show, don't tell. Don't just tell me what you mean. Show me what you mean. Those are the 5. Touch those 5s, you'll be okay on this. You'll be okay. No promises, but you'll be okay. All right. I'm going to turn it over to John in like a minute or 2. I just wanted the chance to say hello to you all. Thank you all for your interest in the law school. We love our own undergraduates. Yes, we do. So go ahead and apply. Present yourself in the most open way possible. Open and unafraid should be your watchwords as you apply. Open and unafraid. Let us get to know you. That's what we're trying to do. It's not just about your GPA. That matters. Of course it does. But it's about who you are, not just what your grades are. Okay? And on that note, John, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let me thank all of you for coming. It's a really nice turnout. Angela and John can go over logistics of this, when the applications are due, et cetera, when you'll hear all that stuff. But for now, I look forward to reading your applications. And these are hard decisions, but I look forward to them every year. It's real fun to just read files of our own. And that's what we consider you, our own. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe and be healthy. And we will be in touch soon. As soon as I hear from you guys, you'll hear from us sometime late spring. Take care, everybody. See ya.
Well, there we go. What more do you need to know, really? What more is there to say? Angela and I can field questions about any aspect of this process. Angela is our administrator of special programs at the law school in our admissions office and has been running this show with considerable expertise for some time now, and is also an alum of Georgetown Law herself. Before we open it up to questions, Angela, do you want to make any sort of like general comments about the application process, or any words of general application?
Sure. So on the website, we do have instructions for submitting your application materials. It's very helpful for the parts of the application that you are required to submit yourself, that you combine those all into one PDF. Part of the reason that you have to submit these via email is that we do not require you to take the Lsat or register with LSAC. So with these applications, we have to manually enter every single one into the LSAC, database that we use. So there can be a little bit of a delay. Like I have to manually enter every single one of the applications that we receive. I haven't started sending the online status checker email yet. I do anticipate having that done by the end of the week. So after you submit your application and you're entered into the system, the next day you'll receive an email from LSAC with login information to the online status checker, where you can check to see if your application is complete or if there's anything that we're missing. And there is a checklist that shows which items we've received. And if we haven't received everything, you'll see that it's not checked off. And the application deadline is April 10th. We do typically render the decisions toward the end of April or the beginning of May. With the increase in applications this year, I'm not sure if there will be a delay or not. So that's just something to keep in mind. And they're, unlike the normal process, these are made after the decisions are made after the application deadline, rather than on a rolling basis. And it's helpful if you can get things in and not wait until the last minute, so that once everything is, once the application deadline passes, I submit all of the complete applications to Andy, and it's best to submit as many complete applications to him as possible at the same time and not have outstanding incomplete applications after April 10th.
Thanks, Angela. as she noted, a very, very different process from the usual law school applications game. If you find yourself a couple years down the road applying to other law schools, God forbid, but they would probably be processing applications on a rolling basis. They would be making decisions as those applications come in the door. So in that context, it would certainly be helpful to apply earlier. I think we can kind of just throw it open to questions. You can chat questions at us or use the hand raise feature or raise your actual physical biological hands. Any approach that you would care to take is welcome, and we will answer as many questions as you've got. So here's a question in the chat. If admitted, can you defer a year or more between graduating and starting law school? Angela, do you have an initial take on that?
Sure. So deferral requests are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. If admitted, you would still be required to submit a first and second deposit to reserve your seat. And those amounts are typically $1,000, and that's usually a June 1st deadline. And the second deposit is $1,500, and that's a November 1st deadline. So you would still need to submit those deposits. Typically, I would say that they are granted. We do take deferral requests throughout, your senior year. The sooner the better. We typically ask that you submit the deferral request no later than May 1st of the year that you're graduating. That is when we need to know what's going on with our entering class. So the sooner you can submit the deferral request, the better. But they are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So I can't make any promises that a request would be approved. And they're typically done on a 1-year basis. Rarely will Andy grant 2 years at a time.
Other questions? It's all perfectly clear. Let's see. In relation to the COVID-19 grading policy, will a student's choice to pass-fail a course negatively affect their early assurance application? Is there an unofficial limit on the number of courses a student can pass-fail? My instinct here is that we really make these sort of calls and evaluations on a case-by-case basis. I would not say there's an unofficial limit in terms of the number of courses that a student is pass-failing. And obviously we understand that current circumstances have made a great many people much more likely to have pass-fails on their transcript. We get that, and we're not going to be weirded out or otherwise put out by it. So I would not worry too much about that.
I would add to that, if possible, if you do have a pass-fail course, it can be helpful to get a letter of recommendation from the professor to give more, in-depth or different, more in-depth evaluation of how you performed in the class beyond a pass-fail grade.
That's a very good suggestion.
It's not required to do so, but it can be helpful.
That's a very good point and good advice. Other questions?
I see. Also, this one came privately, but I do kind of get this question on a regular basis about being a transfer student. So it's not a problem if you are a transfer student. You would just need to submit transcripts from both Georgetown and any other previous undergraduate institutions that you attended. If you're graduating early, it can be kind of tricky. Like if you're graduating in May 2022, then you typically can't apply. We did have an applicant who is graduating this year, and they are not able to apply as early assurance. I would recommend emailing law special programs at georgetown.edu with more specifics of if you have any questions like that, like when you're actually going to be graduating, because it depends on your graduation date. Basically, you need to graduate by, your graduation date needs to be May 2022. So if you're graduating in like fall or winter 2022, then I don't think you would be able to apply, but I would email Law Special Programs and I will double check with Andy on whether or not he'll accept an application.
A related question on the transfer front, whether letters of recommendation can come from professors at the previous institution. I would think that would be completely fine. I'd be very comfortable with that.
Yeah, I would say that that's fine as well. I also see that we have a question about maintaining the GPA. So under the early assurance program, you do not have to maintain a certain GPA after you're admitted. But I will say that when it comes time for merit scholarship, that's something that is going to be taken into consideration. And there is language in the admission letter that your admission is contingent on, I think, good behavior, like something doesn't come up that is bad. And if you have like academic probation or something like that, I think that could affect your admission. But there isn't a specific GPA that you need to maintain.
A direct message here. Angela, are offers ever conditional on LSAT scores?
No, so we do not require, as long as you have 85th percentile or better SAT or ACT score, you can use that. But if you don't have that, we'll take any LSAT, GRE, or GMAT score. Basically, we need something to meet the ABA's requirements for having a standardized admissions test on file for the applicant or for the admitted student. But then again, also when it comes to merit scholarships, that is something that would be taken into account. So it's to your benefit to do well on the test if you do need to take it, but you don't have to meet a certain minimum. And the financial aid packages related to the merit scholarships, the review typically starts the beginning of February. And John, I don't know if it's changed this year, but are we starting to make awards around March?
I think that's about right. Yeah. Yes.
And then I think usually with regard to like need-based aid with the financial aid office, they have to wait for the university to set the budget for the year. And I think that usually happens around the end of February, beginning of March. Is that correct, John? I don't know if it's changed.
I think that's about right. Yeah.
So
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I had a bunch of, so I did just mention that we do have need-based scholarships. The deadline for accepting the decision. So there are 2 deposits, as I mentioned before, and they're typically due June 1st and November 1st. Those deposits are not binding. They hold your seat, but if you do apply to other law schools and get in, you would lose your deposit, but there wouldn't be any issue with you withdrawing. So the early assurance admission is not a binding decision.
Couple more messages over here on my end. Can we provide insight in terms of how applications are evaluated, how are grades and test scores, the SAT, for example, extracurriculars, essays weighted in terms of evaluating an application? The short answer is that there's no formula or algorithm here with 30% to grades and 10% essays, nothing like that. It's much more holistic, much more of a sort of big picture evaluation. All of these things factor into it. Obviously, though, I would say, and then I'll ask Angela for her thoughts on this, I would say that grades certainly do matter quite a bit here, since, of course, we are making the decision without that LSAT, without the GRE in front of us, without the sort of predictive power that has about how the applicant is likely to do in law school. So obviously grades do loom pretty significantly here, I would say.
I would agree with that. I think one thing that I would note is that it can be more competitive to be admitted under the early assurance admissions process. So if you do apply and you aren't admitted, I would not be discouraged from applying again under the regular admission cycle, because it is a little bit more competitive process under early assurance.
Another, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I just had a few more questions, but if you wanted to add on to anything there.
I've got a few more too. I guess we can just alternate. So your turn.
Okay, so I addressed that it's not binding. For the 85th percentile, that is determined based on the year that you took the exam. And a related question to that about specific tasks. So if you do decide to use your ACT or SAT score, then you still have to have an official score sent directly to us. That's an ABA requirement, that we have an official score report on file. So if admitted, we would give you instructions about that. And no, there aren't any particular courses that you need to take during your senior year. That was two questions together. So it's your turn for a question.
What does the logistical process look like for sharing the SAT, ACT scores with our office, with the admissions office?
So that information is provided to us on the Dean's certification form. We are having a little bit of an issue. I think that they're having, because we're working from home, there's kind of an access issue with scores, but that's not something that you need to be concerned about. And then if you're admitted, we send instructions for how to request that the official report be sent directly to us. With regard to the SAT scores, somebody asks, for the merit scholarship, do LSAT scores weigh more than SAT scores? And I don't believe that they do, but I'll let John answer that if he has other information.
I agree with that. I think that's right. We would treat them as quite comparable, I think. Here is a good and appropriate question. If admitted, when do you need to commit to actually attending? Before the start of your senior year? And would applying to other law schools therefore be prohibited?
No. Like I say, you just have to make the deposits to reserve your seat, but you're free to apply to other law schools and you're not bound to attend.
And when would
somebody wants to know where, okay, go ahead.
Sorry. When would they sort of need to let us know that they're attending or not?
Usually, I mean, it's just like the other admitted students that we admit during the regular cycle. The sooner you let us know, the better, so that we can, make adjustments in our entering class. With the early assurance, the deposits are made, much more in advance than for the regular students, who their deposit deadlines are May 1st and June 1st. So I'd say if you know that you're not coming, like no later than May 1st would be great for us to know, so that we can make adjustments. Somebody wanted to know where the recording session will be posted. The recording of this session is going to be posted.
I will share that with Andreas, and he can distribute however their office would like to do that. A question about any guidance on letters of recommendation, what kinds of professors to ask, any downside to asking someone who is not a professor. My own take on this would be, ultimately we want a professor who can sort of really speak to you and your academic abilities in some detail. So preferably someone who, you have gotten to know a little bit. I think that, it can definitely be helpful if the course was dependent on those skills that are kind of central to the study and practice of law. So a course that was reading intensive, writing intensive, that had a sort of critical reading or writing element to it, whether that's, philosophy or history or political science or English or some other field. There's lots of departments in which to do it, but something along those lines strikes me as a good kind of course to get a letter of recommendation. In terms of asking someone who is not a professor, that is, definitely something you can do as well. I think though that if you're sort of trying to choose between one or another, I would definitely err on the side of getting an academic letter of recommendation. I think that's sort of most helpful to us in evaluating your application. Angela, do you have any thoughts on letters?
I would agree with that err on the side of caution for an academic letter. But I would also say that we only require one letter of recommendation, but you're welcome to, have additional letters of recommendation submitted. I would say with the caveat, try not to submit 12 different letters of recommendation. Like, it's definitely about quality over quantity. So, but yeah, you're free to submit more than one letter of recommendation.
There was a question whether we have any advice about courses that, while not required for you to take during your senior year, might be helpful to take before entering law school. I think that something along the lines we were talking about with letters of recommendation, some coursework that's intensive in critical reading and writing, whatever the department might be, I think that could be helpful. I think that if you were to take a course in American history, particularly American political, constitutional, legal history, that could certainly be helpful. I think any sort of course that is law adjacent could be useful and helpful, especially I think when it comes to providing a kind of historical political context background for constitutional law, for example, when you take that during your first year. But I think there's no sort of one particular answer that we're looking for here. Angela, do you have any curricular wisdom on what to take during senior year?
I mean, I kind of feel like law school is so different than undergraduate courses. I did have one course in undergrad that was taught by a law professor, and she actually used a case book. So I think you can have the historical context, but I feel like most undergraduate classes are not going to be like law school.
Law school is an unusual animal unto itself, no question about that. I think I'm actually out of questions over here. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so I do have just a couple more. As a current sophomore, do you have any advice to prepare for the application or anything I should consider doing now or in the next year? I think that basically goes back to the how we evaluate a file. Like, we take a holistic approach. So we look at your coursework, how well you've done academically, any extracurricular activities. If you haven't gotten close to a professor, then maybe at least try to have at least one professor in the next year or so that you can form a relationship with, who can write a good letter of recommendation for you. But other than that, did you have any other advice there, John?
No, I think that sums it up. That's what I would do.
I think I kind of answered this question, but just to reiterate, somebody asked, are there negatives to doing more than one letter of recommendation? No, there aren't any negatives to that. Just again, quantity or quality over quantity is important. You don't want a superficial letter of recommendation. Like, sometimes people get letters of recommendation from a senator or a House of Representatives, thinking that carries more weight. But unless that person knows you or has worked with you, then it's generally not helpful. So that kind of stuff. So it's not so much about who's writing it, like their status, but the quality of the letter that they can write for you. Does that make sense? I think, John, what I'm saying?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we'd much rather have a good detailed 2 or 3 page letter from an adjunct lecturer who really knows your writing, knows your thinking, rather than a 3-sentence letter from Senator so-and-so. We will get a lot more from that more detailed letter that talks about your academic and personal potential than we would from the letter from the person who has the impressive name, but who doesn't really know you and can't speak to you in as much detail. So totally agree.
Related to that letters of recommendation, we have a question that said, would a professor from junior or senior year be preferable, or junior or sophomore year? I don't know if, does it make a difference if it's from their freshman, sophomore, or junior year?
I think it really depends on the context, I would say. If you had that strong relationship with a professor during your first year, then I would be perfectly comfortable asking them for a letter of recommendation. It's, I think, more common for most folks that they're doing more sort of advanced work in a smaller class during their sophomore or junior years. But if there was an SFS Pro seminar, for example, that you took during first year, or some other equivalent kind of small class where you did really, really good work with a professor and developed a good relationship with them, I would not hesitate at all to use them as a recommender.
I did have another question related to somebody who had submitted their application materials. In case anybody arrived late, we have just started entering them in manually, and I haven't started sending out the confirmation email via Lsat yet, but I do anticipate that should be starting next, or by the end of this week, by the end of Friday. And then after that, once I get that email set up, it will happen on a regular basis after the application has been entered into the system. And related to that, somebody asked if their letters of recommendation are submitted before we submit our own application materials. Is there something we should do to help keep track of those materials, inform you all about those early submissions from recommenders? No, so we do have a process for holding on to materials. We have a file that we keep them in until we receive the application, and then we'll match those materials to the application. So the Dean's certification form and any letters of recommendation can be submitted in advance of you submitting your application. What I would recommend for the letters of recommendation is that the professor includes something in either the email or the letter itself, noting that they are writing the letter of recommendation for an early assurance applicant. And then once you do submit your application, as I said, once I manually enter that into the system will send out an email the next day with login information so that you can check to see what we've received. And the recommenders' names will also be listed on that online status checker. We did have another question about the personal statement. Somebody arrived late. I'll note that we are recording the session. So anything that Andy said about personal statement and advice will be available on the recorded link. But John, did you have any other advice on personal statements that you would like to add?
I would certainly reiterate everything that Andy said. Keep it short, strong opening, tell a story, have it be about you rather than someone who is not you. I would say, for me personally, it is always helpful when I have a sense from reading the application or for reading the personal statement in context with the rest of the application. I really value it and appreciate it when I have a sense for why law is the next step, for why you're here, for why you want to become an attorney. Contrary-wise, it can be very unhelpful to read a personal statement that is perhaps very, very interesting and compelling and well written and perhaps even deeply moving, but when I put it down, I just don't understand why law school. I don't understand why the law is the next step. So, I think there's a number of ways to sort of have that part of the story be in there, but the kind of a good test for any lawyer is always that the evidence they are using be relevant. So I think the test for relevance here is kind of, does this relate to me? Does this story, this personal statement relate to me wanting to become a lawyer? I would add that in there as well.
Okay, I think that is all of the questions that I have on my end. If anybody has any eligibility, oh wait. We have another question. Are law schools looking for people who want to be attorneys versus judges or anything else?
That's a good question. So I think that, you certainly don't have to have your entire legal career sketched out in any detail when you apply to law school. You don't need to be able to identify in advance, for example, that you want to be a particular kind of lawyer. You don't have to choose that or specify that. You don't have to think, I know I want to be a civil rights lawyer or a white collar defender, or that I want to do environmental law or health law. All of that is stuff that you can decide later down the road. And it's also perfectly appropriate to, I think, be open to using the law degree in a variety of different contexts, whether as a practicing attorney, whether being interested in the judiciary, whether working in government. I think the thing I might watch out for is if someone were to apply and sort of sketch out a future career goal where you just don't need the law degree at all, I might ask myself then, well, then why go to law school? But I think that, we're looking for a variety in our incoming class in many, many different ways, including certainly the areas of law that people want to go into, and also the kinds of careers, the kinds of legal employers that people are envisioning for themselves. So I hope that somewhat answers the question. If not, just follow up in the text.
I haven't received any additional questions, but one of the things I was going to say before I got that last question in is that, again, with the eligibility questions about whether or not you're eligible to apply, please email me at lawspecialprograms@georgetown.edu, and I will double check with Andy about your eligibility. And if you have any other questions that come up after this info session, you're always welcome to email lawspecialprograms@georgetown.edu, and we'll follow up with you about your inquiry. We do have one more question. Can you provide any insight into the diversity statement? What makes a strong diversity statement?
Sure. So the diversity statement is an optional piece of the application. Don't have to do it, but we, I think, always appreciate those who do submit one, just like we value folks who submit any other sort of optional piece of our application. It, I think, shows that the applicant, wanted to spend a little bit more time, a few more additional hours writing for us, and that's certainly something that we appreciate. The diversity statement is very, very open-ended. It can be used to talk about diversity, inclusion, equity in any number of different aspects, in terms of your own life experience, in terms of experience that you would bring to the law school. People will use this to talk about race, to talk about ethnicity, to talk about sexual orientation, to talk about gender identity, to talk about disability, to talk about class, to talk about many, many other different aspects of diversity as well. Again, it is very much optional, but I think it is something that we very much do value in terms of reading applications. In terms of length for the diversity statement, I would say, a page or two is a good length, but that is not by any means a hard deadline. There aren't too many hard page limits in this process, with a few exceptions here and there. So if more than that is needed, I would not worry too much about going a little bit over. Any other questions?
We did have another, I had kind of a variation on the personal statement question, which I was typing to Maddie, but it's easier to just kind of explain it. Dean Kornblatt covered personal statement advice at the beginning of the session, and John just addressed it a couple minutes ago. For any of you arriving late, we are recording this session, and we will provide the link to Andreas, so you can have access to the full information session. And again, there aren't any specific length requirements for anything on the application, but a good rule of thumb is no more than 2 pages for the personal statement, and usually for the optional statements, no more than 1 page.
Okay, well, I am completely out of questions. I have nothing.
Yeah, I don't see any additional questions either.
Any recommendations on the resume? I would say don't worry about page limits on a resume. I think going over 1 page is totally fine. I would err on the side of including more stuff on the resume. I personally find the resume to be extremely helpful, just in terms of sort of quickly orienting myself to the applicant and to their kind of the timeline of their story. I think that's about it for the resume. Do you have thoughts on that, Angela?
Just make sure you double check for typos, which I mean, that's advice that, should be known, but it's always a good reminder. Okay.
Okay, well, I think that we can adjourn 12 minutes early then. But thank you for all of your really, really good questions. Look forward to seeing your names in our applicant pool sometime quite soon, we hope. If you do have more questions, law special programs at georgetown.edu. That is the most helpful spot to connect and get more info. We're happy to follow up there if you do have more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.